well into her 80s, the notorious RBG. And her last fervent wish was that a new president, the winner of this election, would pick her replacement. When you look at her opinions, you realize she wasn't just writing for today, she was writing for tomorrow. To the women of America, we have come so far, and in the name of RBG, we should not go backwards. As the rabbi said at Justice Ginsburg's memorial in the Capitol, her dissents, her strong words when she would disagree with the Republican-appointed justices, her words were never cries of defeat. They were blueprints for the future. So to all Americans, this hearing, whatever these guys try to do, whatever you hear from me, it will not be a cry of defeat. It will instead be our blueprint for the future. Yes, Judge, I think this hearing is a sham. I think it shows real messed up priorities from the Republican Party. But I am here to do my job, to tell the truth. To all Americans, we don't have some clever procedural way to stop this sham, to stop them from rushing through a nominee, but we have a secret weapon that they don't have. We have Americans who are watching, who work hard every day, believe in our country and the rule of law, whether they are Democrats, Republicans, or independent. They know what this president and the Republican Party are doing right now is very wrong. In fact, 74% of Americans think we should be working on a COVID relief package right now instead of this. Let me tell you a political secret. I doubt that it will be a brilliant cross-examination that's going to change this judge's trajectory this week. No, it is you. It is you calling Republican senators and telling them enough is enough, telling them it is personal, telling them they have their priorities wrong. So do it. And it is you voting even when they try to do everything to stop you. It is you making your own blueprint for the future instead of crying defeat. So do it. This isn't Donald Trump's country. It is yours. This shouldn't be Donald Trump's judge. It should be yours. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Barrett, welcome. Congratulations. Jesse Barrett, congratulations. I just want to say, Senator Klobuchar said a number of things about COVID that I agree with. She cited a bunch of really painful stories in Minnesota, and similar stories could be told from across the country. I even agree with parts of her criticism of the mismanagement of COVID by Washington, D.C. I don't know what any of that has to do with what we're here to do today. Huge parts of what we're doing in this hearing would be really confusing to eighth graders. If civics classes across the country tuned into this hearing and tried to figure out what we're here to do, and they heard as much as they've heard about 2009 Finance Committee debates about what should be in a healthcare reform package. I'm blessed to sit not just on the Judiciary Committee, but also on the Finance Committee. And lots of the discussions we've had in here today fit better in a Finance Committee hearing than in a Judiciary Committee hearing. So I think it would be very useful for us to pause and remind ourselves and do some of our civic duty to eighth graders to help them realize what a president runs for, what a senator runs for, and on the other hand, why Judge Barrett is sitting before us today, and what the job is that you're being evaluated for. So if we can back up and do a little bit of eighth grade civics, I think it would benefit us and benefit the watching country, and especially watching eighth grade civics classes. So I'd like to distinguish first between civics and politics, because there was a time, the chairman said at the beginning of this hearing, there was a time when people that would be as different as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she was a heroic woman, that's absolutely true, and Antonin Scalia, another brilliant mind and your mentor, people that different could both go through the Senate and get confirmation votes of 95 or 98 votes. And the chairman said at the beginning of the hearing, he doesn't know what happened between then and now. I think some of what happened between then and now is we decided to forget what civics are and allow politics to swallow everything. So if I can start, I'd like to just remind us of the distinction between civics and politics. Civics is the stuff we're all supposed to agree on, regardless of our policy views differences. Civics is another way we talk about the rules of the road. Civics 101 is the stuff like Congress writes laws, the executive branch enforces laws, courts apply them. None of that stuff should be different if you're a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian or a Green Party member. This is basic civics. Civics is the stuff that all Americans should agree on, like religious liberty is essential. People should be able to fire the folks who write the laws, and the voters can't fire the judges. Judges should be impartial. This is just Civics 101. Politics is different. Politics is the stuff that happens underneath civics. Civics is the overarching stuff we as Americans agree in common. Politics is the subordinate, less important stuff that we differ about. Politics is like if I look at my friend Chris Coons and I say, listen up, jackwagon, what you want to do on this particular finance committee bill is going to be way too expensive and might bankrupt our kids. Or if Chris looks back at me and says, listen up, jackwagon, you're too much of a cheapskate and you're underinvesting in the next generation. That's a really important debate. That's a political debate. That's not civics. Civics is more important than that. Civics doesn't change every 18 to 24 months because the electoral winds change and because polling changes. I think it's important that we help our kids understand that politics is the legitimate stuff we fight about, and civics is the places where we pull back and say, wait a minute, we have things that are in common, and before we fight again about politics, let's reaffirm some of our civics. So I'd like to have just sort of a basic grammar of civics for 5 minutes. One thing that we should all agree on and two things that we should all disagree with. We should agree on it, but one thing that we agree about and are in favor of, and two things that we agree on that we should all reject. First, a positive, grand, unifying truth about America, and that is religious liberty. Religious liberty is the basic idea that how you worship is none of the government's business. Government can wage wars, government can write parking tickets, but government cannot save souls. Government's really important. War is important. Parking tickets are important. But your soul is something that the government can't touch. So whether you worship in a mosque or a synagogue or a church, your faith or your lack of faith is none of the government's business. It's your business and your families and your neighbors and all sorts of places where people break bread together and argue, but it's not about power, it's not about force, it's not about the government. This is the fundamental American belief. Religious liberty is one of those 5 great freedoms clustered in the First Amendment. Religion, speech, press, assembly, and protest, these 5 freedoms that hang together, that are the basic pre-governmental rights, are sort of Civics 101 that we all agree on well before we ever get to anything as relatively inconsequential as tax policy. So civics should be the stuff we affirm together. And contrary to the belief of some activists, religious liberty is not an exception. You don't need the government's permission to have religious liberty. Religious liberty is the default assumption of our entire system. And because religious liberty is the fundamental 101 rule in American life, we don't have religious tests. This committee isn't in the business of deciding whether the dogma lives too loudly within someone. This committee isn't in the business of deciding which religious beliefs are good and which religious beliefs are bad and which religious beliefs are weird. And I just want to say, as somebody who's self-consciously a Christian, we got a whole bunch more really weird beliefs. Forgiveness of sins, the virgin birth, resurrection from the dead, eternal life. There are a whole bunch of really, really crazy ideas that are a lot weirder than some Catholic moms giving each other advice about parenting. And yet there are places where this committee has acted like it's the job of the committee to delve into people's religious communities. That's nuts. That's a violation of our basic civics. That's a violation of what all of us believe together. This is not a Republican idea. It is not a Democrat idea. It's a Democrat idea and a Republican idea, but more fundamentally, it's an American idea. And the good news is, whether you think your religious beliefs might be judged wacky by someone else, it's none of the business of this committee to delve into any of that in this context. Because in this committee and in this Congress and in this constitutional structure, religious liberty is the basic truth. And whatever you or I or Judge Barrett believe about God isn't any of the government's business.
We can all believe in that in common. We should all reaffirm that in common, and that should be on display over the course of the next 4 days in this committee. Now, a couple of terms that all of our 8th graders should know as things we should reject in common. And again, shared rejection, not Republican versus Democrat or Democrat versus Republican, but a shared American rejection. And the first is this: judicial activism. Judicial activism is the idea that judges get to advocate for or advance policies even though they don't have to stand for election before the voters and even though they have lifetime tenure. Judicial activism is the really bad idea that tries to convince the American people to view the judiciary as a block of progressive votes and conservative votes, Republican justices and Democratic justices. This is the confused idea that the Supreme Court is just another arena for politics. When politicians try to demand that judicial nominees, who are supposed to be fair and impartial, when politicians try to get judicial nominees to give their views on cases or to give their views on policies, to try to get them to pre-commit to certain outcomes in future court cases, we are politicizing the courts, and that is wrong. That is a violation of our oath to the Constitution. Likewise, when politicians refuse to give answers to the pretty basic question of whether or not they want to try to change the number of justices in the court, which is what court packing actually is, when they want to try to change the outcome of what courts do in the future by trying to change the size and composition of the court, that is a bad idea that politicizes the judiciary and reduces public trust. On the other hand, depoliticizing the court looks a lot like letting courts and judges do their jobs and the Congress do our jobs. You don't like the policies in America? Great, elect different people in the House and in the Senate and in the presidency. Fire the politicians at the next election. But voters don't have the freedom to fire the judges. Therefore, we should not view judges and we should not encourage judges or the public to view them as ultimately politicians who hide behind their robes. The antidote to judicial activism is originalism. Originalism, also known as textualism, is basically the old idea from 8th grade civics that judges don't get to make laws. Judges just apply them. An originalist comes to the court with a fundamental humility and modesty about what the job is that they're there to do. An originalist doesn't think of herself as a super legislator whose opinions will be read by angels from stone tablets in heaven. Judicial activism, on the other hand, is the bad idea that judges' black robes are just fake, and truthfully, they're wearing red or blue partisan jerseys under there. We should reject all such judges. And so today, when we have a nominee before us, we should be asking her questions that are not about trying to predetermine how certain cases will be judged. And a final term that we should be clear about, I mentioned earlier, but I think it's worth underscoring, is we should underscore what is court packing. Court packing is the idea that we should blow up our shared civics, that we should end the deliberative structure of the Senate by making it just another majoritarian body for the purposes of packing the Supreme Court. Court packing would depend on the destruction of the full debate here in the Senate, and it is a partisan suicide bombing that would end the deliberative structure of the United States Senate and make this job less interesting for all 100 of us. Not for 47 or 53, because it's hard to get to a supermajority that tries to protect the American people from 51, 49, 49, 51 swings all the time. What blowing up the filibuster would ultimately do is try to turn the Supreme Court into the ultimate super legislature. Court packing is not judicial reform, as some of you who wrote the memo over the weekend got a lot of media to bite on. Court packing is destroying the system we have now. It is not reforming the system we have now. And anybody who uses that the language that implies filling legitimate vacancies is actually just another form of court packing that's playing the American people for fools. And the American people actually want a Washington, D.C. that depoliticizes more decisions, not politicizes more decisions. So, Judge, I'm glad that you're before us. I'm looking forward to hearing your opening statement later today, and I look forward to the questioning you have to endure over the next 2 or 3 days, even though you probably look forward to it a little bit less. Congratulations and welcome.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Barrett, to you and your family, welcome. Over the past weeks, I've been flooded with calls, texts, emails from Delawareans. Delawareans who are scared because they are worried. worried about their own health, the health of a parent or child, because they don't know if it's safe for their kids to go to school, if their businesses will survive, or because they're wondering why on earth this Senate is focused on racing forward with a Supreme Court nominee, but is not willing to take a vote to provide needed relief for them and their families. It is an understandable question when we're in the midst of a devastating global pandemic in which more than 210,000 Americans have died, more than 7 million have been infected and have a new pre-existing condition, why there were just 300,000 new cases this week. And today, more than 25 million Americans are collecting unemployment. This is an ongoing national emergency, and as an exercise in civics, not politics, we in Congress should be working day and night to deliver them that relief. Instead, my colleagues are barreling forward with a confirmation hearing that's distracting from our responsibility to our constituents and threatens to further tear our nation apart. Mr. Chairman, as you know, we're just 22 days from an election. There is no precedent, despite my colleagues' lengthy and I think hypocritical lecture about the history, there is no precedent in our nation's history for confirming a Supreme Court nominee by the Senate this close to a presidential election, in which a majority of states are already voting. In fact, 6 million Americans have voted. This process flies in the face of the very rule Republicans set themselves in 2016, when they refused, as a matter of politics, not of civics, to even consider a highly qualified nominee, Judge Merrick Garland, 9 months before an election, simply because it was an election year. And Mr. Chairman, in 2018, you went a step further and said, if an opening on the Supreme Court came up in the last year of President Trump's term, you would wait until the next election and let the voters decide. So what changed? Sadly, nothing. Nothing except the fact that this time, President Trump and his allies in the Senate saw a chance in Justice Ginsburg's untimely passing to shift the balance of the Supreme Court for decades to come, and that will have consequences in the real lives of millions of Americans. Proceeding with this confirmation today is wrong. And if I could, to my colleague who just spoke, religious liberty, I agree, is foundational to our civics and our republic. And I and my colleagues will focus, Judge Barrett, on your legal writings, your opinions, your articles, your speeches as a law professor and judge. And I think when we do that, we will conclude the ways in which you may serve as a justice will do irreparable harm. I think proceeding with this nomination in this way at this time will also do harm to what remaining trust we have in each other, to the Senate as a whole, and potentially to the court itself. As if all of this weren't reason enough for us to delay, we're proceeding despite having 2 members of this committee who've contracted the virus. That's why the Senate's out of session today. That's why all of us, when not speaking, are wearing masks. That's why the distance between us. In light of all of this, in light of the stresses on our country, I think this rushed, hypocritical, partisan process should not proceed. But instead we are. So let me try and help explain to those who've reached out to me why and why it matters. Centrally, it's this. President Trump has promised over and over and over again that he would repeal the Affordable Care Act. He ran on that promise, but despite his very best efforts, he's failed. My Republican colleagues here and in the House have voted over and over and over to repeal the Affordable Care Act since it was passed a decade ago. But thankfully for the people of our nation and my state, they too have been unsuccessful. And yet today, to make good on this promise, to achieve what they could not accomplish through the democratic process, they're looking to the courts, in fact, to the court. They're looking to this nominee. President Trump explicitly promised anyone he nominated to the Supreme Court would do the right thing and be a vote to overturn the Affordable Care Act. And just 1 week after the upcoming election, the Supreme Court will hear a case in which the Affordable Care Act is at issue and where the Supreme Court will hear argument that supports the Trump administration and the Trump's Department of Justice position to strike down this landmark law. So let me be clear. Just a week after the upcoming election, the Trump administration will be telling the Supreme Court to tear down the very law that provides health care protections in the middle of an ongoing pandemic. Judge Barrett, you've publicly criticized the Supreme Court's past decisions upholding the Affordable Care Act, and I think that is appropriately at issue in the days to come. The president knows this, and it's one reason why he and my colleagues are rushing to have this confirmation just in time to hear the administration's challenge to the Affordable Care Act. I don't think this is a coincidence. It's beyond ironic that this administration, which has failed to respond to this pandemic, is rushing through a judge they believe will vote to strip away health care protections. Today, because of the Affordable Care Act, insurance companies cannot discriminate against women for being women. They cannot charge more. They cannot treat pregnancy as a pre-existing condition. I cannot think of a sharper irony as we consider the legacy of Justice Ginsburg, who dedicated her life to fighting for gender equality. It also prevents insurance companies from charging any with pre-existing conditions more, so Americans no longer have to worry about going bankrupt because of an unexpected illness or accident. Don't take my word for it. Listen to the voice of Carrie, who's behind me to my right. Carrie from Middletown, Delaware, used to pay $800 a month for junk insurance, as she called it, coverage so skimpy she had to live in fear of going to the doctor's office or needing medication. Because of the ACA, she was able to get better coverage to pay what she can afford based on her income. She has diabetes, she has high blood pressure, but thanks to the ACA, she can't be denied care or coverage. She told me when he spoke, this takes the stress and the worry out of it, and then asked me, how is this even at issue? Wasn't that settled years ago? Carrie's right. She should have the peace of mind that you can care for yourself and your family if you get sick. I've heard so many more stories from Delaware. Just over my shoulder here is Debbie from Newcastle, a self-employed small business owner who receives her health insurance through the marketplace. Her pre-existing condition requires her to attend physical therapy and doctor's appointments multiple times each month. Without the ACA, insurance companies would have charged her more because of her condition, and she wouldn't be able to afford her medical bills and support her small business. There's Barb Slater from Newark, Delaware, who was diagnosed with scleroderma 4 years ago. After losing her employer-sponsored health insurance, she was able to find new coverage in the marketplace thanks to the Affordable Care Act. My inbox and the inbox of all my colleagues are filled with stories like Carrie's, Debbie's, Barb's, and they highlight the breadth of what the ACA means to the American people. The ability of young people to stay on their family's insurance, lower out-of-pocket costs for seniors' prescriptions, the elimination of lifetime caps. These protections are on the line in the ballot and on the docket of the Supreme Court. And it's not just the ACA at risk. Judge, I'm deeply concerned about ways in which your approach to something that may sound abstract to folks watching stare decisis or precedent, that means your approach to reviewing and reconsidering and possibly overturning long-settled cases may overturn some of the very principles for which Justice Ginsburg fought her entire adult life, principles that protect settled fundamental rights for all Americans. What might this mean? Cases like Griswold versus Connecticut that establish married couples have a right to obtain and use contraception in the privacy of their own home may be in danger of being struck down. It means cases like Roe versus Wade, which protects a woman's right to make her own critical health care decisions, may be on the line. And it means Obergefell versus Hodges, which made marriage equality the law of this land, could be overruled. Just a day after we celebrated Coming Out Day nationally, stripping LGBTQ individuals of what Justice Kennedy memorably called equal dignity in the eyes of the law. This is what I believe is at stake with this nomination. Judge Barrett, you will be deciding cases that have real daily impacts on the lives of millions of Americans. They deserve to understand why President Trump nominated you and what consequences your decisions may have on them and their lives. I've heard my Republican colleagues say all they care about is finding a future justice who will apply the law as written, as if all this is about today is an abstract fight about interpretive methodology and jurisprudence. They seem shocked we're talking about what the Supreme Court might do if Judge Barrett were to become Justice Barrett. But Judge Barrett, I'm not suggesting you made some secret deal with President Trump, But I believe the reason you were chosen is precisely because your judicial philosophy, as repeatedly stated, could lead to the outcomes President Trump has sought. And I think that has dramatic and potentially very harmful consequences with regards to the election, the Affordable Care Act, and long settled rights. This is what I intend to lay out this week, and this is what I hope the American people will hear in the course of this confirmation hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Coons. For planning purposes, I think I talked to Senator Feinstein. We will go to Senator Hawley, Blumenthal, and Tillis. We'll take a 30-minute break to grab a bite to eat and take a little bit of a break and come back and finish up. So, Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Barrett, welcome. It's good to see you again. Jesse Barrett, welcome, and to you and to your family as well. I see that some of your children are getting a break. They've earned it, I think. I'm amazed as I've been watching. I've got 2 little boys at home, my wife and I do. I can't believe how calmly your children have been sitting for a couple of hours. So maybe you can give me some tips, Jesse and Judge, when we're finished here. You know, we've gotten to read a lot about your family in the last few weeks. We've gotten to read a lot about you in the press, and in particular about your religious beliefs. One attack after another in the liberal media, one hit piece after another, many of them echoed by members of this committee, like this one, for instance, Barrett, long active with Insular Christian Group. We've read stories about your Catholic lifestyle, stories about how you raise your children, stories about how you adopted your children, stories about your Catholic doctrinal beliefs, over and over and over questioning whether you have, I guess, the independence to be a judge, a justice on the United States Supreme Court. And it's not just in the newspapers, it's members of this committee, including the Democratic nominee for Vice President of the United States, who has questioned past nominees who have come before this committee about their membership in Catholic fraternal organizations like the Knights of Columbus. And for those watching at home, that's right, you heard me correctly. Senator Harris and others on this committee have repeatedly questioned judicial nominees' fitness for office because of their membership in the Knights of Columbus. The ranking member, when you were last before this committee, Judge, for your initial confirmation hearings, the ranking member referred to your Catholic convictions as dogma, that's a quote, that lives loudly within you, picking up the very terminology of anti-Catholic bigotry current in this country a century ago. She wasn't alone. Other senators on this committee last time asked you if you were an Orthodox Catholic. One senator said she worried that you would be a Catholic judge if you were confirmed because of your religious beliefs, I guess as opposed to an American judge, as if you can't be both a devout Catholic and a loyal American citizen. And it's not just you, Judge. Other nominees who have come before this committee for years now have been asked by my Democrat colleagues over and over their views on sin, their views on the afterlife, their views about their membership statements of Catholic organizations, about their membership in other Christian organizations, and on and on and on. And let's be clear about what this is. This is an attempt to broach a new frontier, to set up a new standard. Actually, it's an attempt to bring back an old standard that the Constitution of the United States explicitly forbids. I'm talking about a religious test for office. Article 6 of the Constitution of the United States, before we even get to the Bill of Rights, Article 6 of the Constitution of the United States says clearly, and I quote, "No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States." Now, that was big news in 1787 when it was written, and it's worth remembering why. It's because no country, no republic in the history of the world had ever guaranteed to its citizens the right to freedom of conscience and religious liberty. Every other country that had ever existed tied together the religious beliefs that would be approved by the powerful and the right to serve in office or to vote or just to be a citizen. In every other country across history, you had to agree with what those in power agreed with in order to hold office or be a citizen in good standing. You had to sign a particular religious confession, or you had to disavow a particular religious group, swear not to follow the Pope, for instance. You had to pledge allegiance to the God of the city or the God of the empire. This was true from 18th century Britain all the way back to ancient Rome. And so when our founders put Article 6 into the Constitution of the United States, they were making a very deliberate choice. They were breaking with all of that past history, and they were saying in America it would be different. In the United States of America, we would not allow the ruling class to have veto power over your faith, over what Americans believed, over who we gathered with to worship and why and where and how. No, in this country, the people of the United States would be free to follow their own religious convictions, free to worship, free to exercise their religion, and people of faith would be welcome in the public sphere. They'd be welcome there. They'd be welcome without having to get the approval of those in power, like those on this committee. They would be welcome to come and to bring their religious beliefs to bear on their lives, on their office, and all that they do. So long, of course, as they were peaceful citizens who followed the law. Religious people of all backgrounds would be welcome in public life. And no person in power would be able to control what the American people, any American citizen, thought or believed or who they worshiped. This freedom of conscience and religious liberty undergirds all of our other rights because it tells the government that it cannot tell us what to think or who we can assemble with or how we can worship or what we can say. And that's why Article 6 is there even before we get to the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment. But this bedrock principle of American liberty is now under attack. That is what is at stake when we read these stories attacking Judge Barrett for her faith. That is what is at stake when my Democratic colleagues repeatedly question Judge Barrett and many other judicial nominees about their religious beliefs, about their religious membership, about their religious practices, about their family beliefs and practices. That is an attempt to bring back the days of the religious test. That is an attempt to bring back the veto power of the powerful over the religious beliefs and sincerely held convictions of the American people. And that is what is at stake in this confirmation hearing. Judge Barrett is a Catholic. We all know that. She's a devout Catholic. We all know that. She and her husband have chosen to raise their family according to their Catholic beliefs in faithful fellowship with other Catholics. We all know that. Heck, 65 million Americans are Catholics, and many millions more are Christians of other persuasions. Are they to be told that they cannot serve in public office, that they are not welcome in the public sphere unless the members of this committee sign off on their religious beliefs? I, for one, do not want to live in such an America, and the Constitution of the United States flatly prohibits it. Now, the Constitution says that people of faith, like Judge Barrett, are welcome in high office, welcome in any office, welcome throughout our public life here in this country. And I would just say to my Democrat colleagues that these years now, this pattern and practice, as we say in the law, this pattern and practice of religious bigotry, because that's what it is. When you tell somebody that they're too Catholic to be on the bench, when you tell them they're going to be a Catholic judge, not an American judge, that's bigotry. The pattern and practice of bigotry from members of this committee must stop. And I would expect that it be renounced. Now, I just heard my colleague, Senator Coons, make a reference to an old case, the Griswold case, which I can only assume is another hit at Judge Barrett's religious faith, referring to Catholic doctrinal beliefs. I don't know what else it could be, since no one has challenged this case. It is not a live issue and hasn't been for decades. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about, and this is the sort of attacks that must stop. I look forward, Judge Barrett, to getting to the chance to speak with you further about your legal credentials, about your legal views, about your approach to the law and your judicial philosophy. But I hope that one thing that this confirmation process will stand for in the end, I hope when we look back at the confirmation hearings for Judge Amy Barrett, soon I hope to be Justice Amy Barrett, one thing we will say is that was the time, that was the year that the attempt to bring back religious tests for office was finally stopped. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Barrett, and to your family, welcome to the committee. I want to introduce you to one of my constituents, Curran of Ridgefield, Connecticut. He is 10 years old, and he suffers from Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It is a horrible, incurable disease. It slowly deprives children of the strength and their ability to move. Eventually, it robs them of their lives. The costs of providing Connor's care are astronomical, but for Connor and his family, it is worth every penny. Connor is a superhero, but he's always had a real sidekick. He's had the protection of the Affordable Care Act. It has shielded him and his family from arbitrary caps on coverage that would have cut off his care when it became too expensive. It has protected Connor from losing insurance because of this insidious disease that he never caused and chose. The Affordable Care Act has given his family a measure of relief, of hope, of peace. They still worry about Connor's health, but not their coverage or its costs. Connor and millions of others like him are why I will oppose your nomination. Your nomination is about the Republican goal of repealing the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare they seem to detest so much. It's about people like Connor, protections for people with pre-existing conditions, tax credits that make health insurance more affordable, bans on charging women more simply because they are women. That's what my Republican colleagues have been fighting to repeal for the last decade. They voted dozens and dozens of times to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and they have challenged it twice unsuccessfully in the United States Supreme Court. And each time they failed, but now, just 1 week after the election, as you know, the fate of the Affordable Care Act will be again in the hands of the United States Supreme Court. Republicans have turned again to the court to try to achieve judicially what they cannot achieve legislatively. President Trump has vowed that any judge he nominated would pass the very strong test, his words, and that they would strike down the Affordable Care Act. Judge Barrett, in all honesty, you have auditioned for this job through your academic writing and judicial opinions, and you've passed that test. In fact, you've stated twice in effect that you would have voted to strike down the Affordable Care Act had you been a justice at the time. You've been vetted, you've been screened by the Trump administration and special interests who want an activist judge. They want someone who will legislate from the bench and strike down laws supported by a vast majority of the American people. And that activism uses originalism as a smokescreen. If the American people have any doubts about how dedicated my Republican colleagues are to taking away people's health care, just listen to their own words. They've been remarkably candid and forthright. Senator Graham, our chairman, has said, "You can't repair this monstrosity," I'm quoting, "you can't repair this monstrosity called Obamacare. You have to tear it down and start over." Senator Ernst has said, quote, "I support immediate action to repeal Obamacare and replace it." Senator Cornyn, "It's time to repeal and replace." Senator Tillis, "Repeal Obamacare. Let's end this disaster." And President Trump himself has said, "We want to terminate Obamacare." Millions of Americans more than 130 million, have a pre-existing condition: asthma, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, Parkinson's, pregnancy, and now, by the cruelest of ironies, COVID-19. COVID-19, the cause of this pandemic, now is a pre-existing condition that could prevent millions of Americans from being covered by health care. Stripping health care from millions of Americans during a pandemic, that's really what is at stake in the Republican lawsuit, now before the Supreme Court, and in this nomination. And sadly, it's not just the Affordable Care Act that's at stake. It's a woman's right to decide when and how to have a family, control over her own body. An activist judge on the bench doing what Congress could not do would also strike down common sense gun safety laws. Connecticut has been at the forefront on gun violence protection. On gun safety, Judge, you acknowledged that your dissenting opinion in Canner sounds kind of radical. That's because it is. But if your views on the Second Amendment are adopted by the Supreme Court, it would imperil common sense state laws like Connecticut's all around the country. Today, we ought to be working on improving American health care. We ought to be fighting COVID-19, which has infected 8 million Americans and killed more than 215,000. We should be producing a national testing strategy, instituting effective contact tracing, and securing sufficient PPE. We ought to be providing assistance to the millions of Americans who have lost their job and face economic hardship and heartbreak. President Trump has failed to do any of it. Instead, he and our Republican colleagues are riveted on rushing a judge through this sham process, dropping everything else. President Trump's failure to act will likely lead to 55,000 additional deaths, 55,000 additional Americans lost over just the next 3 months. Senate Republicans are refusing to address American health care or COVID-19 or economic relief because they care more about putting an extremist ideological judge on the bench and not just on the Supreme Court. I've learned as a senator that there are very few unwritten rules, very few written rules, I should say, in this place. But there is one very important unwritten rule. Keep your word. Republicans have all sorts of excuses for why they are breaking their promise, the promise that they would not confirm a Supreme Court justice during an election year. Each excuse boils down to nothing more than raw political power. They're doing it because they can. But might does not make right. They have boasted they have the votes, but they don't have the American people and they don't have history on their side. The American people want a plan to fight and conquer this disease. They want a plan to put Americans back to work. They want a blueprint for the future, not rolling back rights and turning back the clock. I revere the Supreme Court. I clerk for Justice Harry Blackmun. I've argued cases before the court 4 times. Now I'm really deeply concerned that the Supreme Court is losing the trust and respect of the American people. The authority of the Supreme Court depends on that trust. It has no army or police force to enforce its decisions. The American people follow the Supreme Court's commands, even when they disagree, because they respect its authority. And now, President Trump and the Republican center are eroding, indeed destroying, that legitimacy. They've stripped the American people of their say in this process simply to confirm a justice who will strike down in court, legislate from the bench, what they can't repeal in Congress. Your participation, let me be very blunt, in any case involving Donald Trump's election would immediately do explosive, enduring harm to the court's legitimacy and to your own credibility. You must recuse yourself. The American people are afraid and they're angry, and for good reason. It's a break the glass moment. Americans must use their voices to speak out and stand up, to contact my colleagues on this committee, despite their boasts about having the votes. Stand up and speak out to protect their own health, public health, and the health of our democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. We will now have Senator Tillis, who's with us remotely. After his opening statement, we will come back at 12:20. And Senator Hirono, you will be the first one to make a statement. So, Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Chairman Graham and Ranking Member Feinstein. I want to take a moment to honor the life and legacy of Justice Ginsburg. She was a living legend and a giant in the legal world as a professor, as a lawyer, and as a judge and a justice. She was an inspirational model and role model, and we honor her legacy. And I just want to make sure that her family knows the nation mourns her loss. But today we're here to consider a nomination of a highly qualified jurist to the United States Supreme Court, Judge Amy Coney Barrett. She's a top legal scholar, a professor in the mold of the late Justice Scalia. Her work is widely respected in the legal community, and it's clear why her former students voted her multiple times to be the Distinguished Professor of the Year at the Notre Dame Law School. It's also why every full-time faculty member of Notre Dame Law supports her nomination. Her legal work and teaching have inspired hundreds of young lawyers, especially aspiring female lawyers. She's a remarkable mother. She has 7 beautiful children. And in spite of being busy working as a Seventh Circuit justice, she makes time to be involved in her community. And this nomination is important because it's going to have a lasting impact on our republic. A justice service on the bench involves every important issue facing our constitutional republic. What are the limits of abusive and intrusive government power? What's the proper role of each branch of government? And what are the fundamental protections that our Constitution grants all Americans? These are foundational questions for the Supreme Court, and they consider them every single term. If confirmed, Judge Barrett will be tasked with answering these questions, and I believe she's going to do a great job. But it's not the rights enshrined in the Constitution that's most important. It's the structure of the document itself that ensures our freedom. Justice Scalia understood this. He was fond of saying, every dictator in the world, every president for life has a Bill of Rights. That's not what makes us free. What makes us free is our Constitution. Think of the word Constitution. It means structure. Justice Scalia went on to note the genius of our founding generation is that it dispersed power across multiple departments. The real danger to our constitutional republic is centralization of power in any one part of government. When that happens, liberty dies and tyranny reigns. That's why it's critical that Supreme Court justices maintain the proper role. They decide cases, they don't make policy. In recent decades, the court has drifted towards a trend where it decides majority disputes over policy rather than reserving those decisions for the American people through acting through their elected representatives, people like those of us in the U.S. Senate. Article 3 judges cannot and should not be policymakers. We've heard many speak today about policy priorities that they'd like an activist court to pass. Several of my colleagues have engaged in fear-mongering and described Judge Barrett's nomination as an end to health care, abortion rights, labor rights, and the list goes on and on and on. These statements are unfair and they're untrue. This week, they'll attempt to have Judge Barrett commit to policy outcomes rather than do the work for that policy outcome in the U.S. Senate. Just last month, while they were falsely claiming Judge Barrett's nomination would bring an end to the protections for pre-existing conditions, every single Democrat on this committee voted against a measure that would do just that. They're failing to do their job, and they want the court to do it for them. My review of Judge Barrett's record convinces me she's not only one of the most qualified individuals ever to be nominated, but she also understands the proper role of the Article III branch. She reaches conclusions dictated by the law, not by personal preference. That's the right thing to do. My Democratic friends decry the idea that a nominee has predetermined outcome in mind, while in the same breath, they demand the nominee agree to their preferred outcome of a case. The hypocrisy is incredible. They ignore a central fact. Judge Barrett's rulings aren't meant to be for or against a particular policy outcome. She's not a legislator. That's our job. However, when the minority can't get their bad policies passed in Congress, they turn to the courts to demand that judges interpret the law not as written, but as they prefer. Her opinions simply order the outcome the law dictates. As passed by Congress, a politically accountable branch, nothing more and nothing less. My Democratic colleagues claim they care about the First Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the 14th Amendment. If they care about our constitutional liberties, then they should care about confirming a judge who understands the proper role of the Supreme Court. Rights granted by 9 can just as easily be ended by 9. To quote Justice Ginsburg, real change, enduring change, happens one step at a time. It doesn't happen by judicial fiat. Judge Barrett understands that principle. She knows the role of the Supreme Court justice, and she is highly qualified to do this job. Judge Barrett, when I met with you in the Capitol, I asked you to sign 2 pocket constitutions for my 2 granddaughters, and in it, you wrote, "Dream big." When they're old enough to understand the significance, I'm going to explain to them that just like Justice Barrett, they can, with hard work and determination, realize their American dream. So for the next few days, when members of this committee mischaracterize your views, their allies in the liberal media are saying terrible things about you and your family, stand tall, stand proud, and stand true. Rely on your faith. I know that you're an inspiration to millions of young women in this country, like my granddaughters, and we're proud of you. Thank you, Judge Barrett, for being with us today. Congratulations on the recognition of your hard work and your character. I look forward to hearing your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. We'll be in recess until 12:20. We'll start back with Senator Rono.
And then, well, you want to come over and point them out? And then ideally, we have to have that, so. I'm just being Vanna White and going like this. Yeah. Yeah. I share off camera. Senator.
Senator, it's had to go.
No walkie-talkies, no, there's no walkie-talkies. All the way down back. Yeah, I'll walk with you.
Senator, can we talk?
So it's here or it's out one side of the No.
These guys are here.
He's getting moved right now, he's making conversation about and then maybe that she had that view for me, so mine was.
Senator Feinstein, will you talk to the networks briefly?
Questions now. Thank you, Bill.
Actually, I see you. I'm just out here at the stakeout spot, so I'll make my way in. Okay, cool. Thanks. Bye. Not anymore. Yeah. See you, man. Have fun. Thanks.
I know, I totally get it.
Caroline.
It's empty, Drew.
They're all gone?
Yeah, there's nobody else left.
Just you.
I'm swapping out. I really feel like there's like they're walking. What am I gonna do? We have Kennedy guys. Oh, okay, that's fine.
Good, how you doing?
What's up? Hold up one sec. Just for one sec.
Yeah.
Hi, Senator Kennedy.
Hey, guys.
No, I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay.
So, first and foremost, how do you think it's going in there?
Well, so far, it's better than the hearings for Justice Kavanaugh. This is a solemn occasion. We are being asked to advise and consent on a position that is probably the most powerful unelected position for life in any government in the Western world. I hope that today and tomorrow and the rest of the week we will talk about the judge's qualifications, her temperament, her intellect, her character, her judicial philosophy. I think if we do, that will inevitably invite us to talk about the role of the federal judiciary in America's systems of government. I'm not naive. I watched the Kavanaugh hearings. I was there. This thing, based on past experience, could very easily turn into a freak show, but I hope not. Judge Kavanaugh has been called, or rather, Judge Barrett has been called so far a racist, a colonialist, religious bigot. It sounds as if one of the attacks against her will be the allegation that if she is confirmed to be on the Supreme Court, she will be on a mission from God to personally deny coverage, insurance coverage, to all Americans on pre-existing conditions. And I think most of my colleagues know that's not true. If they don't, they should. Coverage for pre-existing conditions is probably one of a handful of issues on which all members of the Congress and the American people agree.
Democrats have made a lot of their arguments today telling personal stories about individuals who might be affected by an overturn or change of the ACA. Are those stories breaking through? Are they making a difference in public opinion about Judge Barrett, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's clear that from the props that they have decided to make that their point of attack. That once again, that in California v. Texas, that Judge Barrett is anti-coverage of pre-existing conditions. I think the testimony today and tomorrow and the next day will show that she's not, and that she has no preconceived notions. Some of my colleagues tried to attack her on her religion and attacked her. The implication was that because she is a Christian, she's unfit to serve in public service. I think they have. I'm not going to argue with you guys. I'm going to answer questions. Okay. I think that they're not likely to follow that line of attack.
Can I ask you, the only thing it seems that right now Republicans agree on is Judge Barrett. You don't agree on a stimulus package. I mean, the president's tweeting about maybe just cancel the hearing.
Who are you with?
John Bresnan from Politico. And I'm just...
Yeah, I think we do agree on a coronavirus package. We spent about 5 weeks putting together one. It received every Republican vote but one, and every single solitary Democrat voted against it.
But
so
you don't support the White House?
I think you're inaccurate when you say we haven't agreed on the package. Our package would provide more help for small business. It would provide more help in unemployment insurance. It would help our schools to reopen. It would provide for more testing. It was a solid bill, and not a single Democrat voted for it.
Well, but the White House package is something the Senate Republicans don't support. What the White House
I haven't seen the White House package.
Well, there was a conference call yesterday where a bunch of Senate
We
Republicans...
didn't. I was on the conference call, and it wasn't yesterday.
I'm sorry.
It was Saturday.
Saturday's call.
But we were not told what's in the package. We talked about an amount, and the only thing we have to base any kind of assertions on in terms of what's in the so-called package is reporting by the commentariat. And I'd prefer to read a bill. I haven't seen a bill.
Are you scared that President Trump's falling poll numbers are going to hurt, or going to cost you guys your majority, cost Republicans a Senate majority?
I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen in this election. I don't. The only prediction I make is that many of the experts will be wrong. They usually are.
Senator, I don't mean to argue with you. I just, seriously, can you name one of your colleagues that has attacked Judge Barrett's religion? Yeah,
I don't want to go there. If you're at all fair-minded, you sat through her confirmation hearing for the Seventh Circuit, And I understand the point of your question is to get me to attack one of my colleagues. But all you got to do is go back and look up the transcript.
You went there.
Anything else? All right, thank you, guys.
Thanks, Senator. I appreciate it.
Y'all go outside, get a little sun.
Be mindful of each other, okay? 2 o'clock is swearing in, is what we're being told. Correct? It would ideally not be going until 7 o'clock, but we get a little bit earlier than 7 tonight. And that was the only break for the day.
Cool. Thank you.
That's the plan, correct? Also, hi. How are you? I'm good, how are you? I like your mask. Thanks. Thank you. Sure, why not have a little bit of fun? Well, that's why I really like a mask and a bandana. Yeah. For fun. I did the bandana for a while and then I was like, okay, I gotta actually connect to this and get a real mask. Yeah. I just like the bandanas more. I feel like the bandana is a little bit more breathable. But then you have the other, so that's not really. But you're right. Yeah. Yeah, it's all right. Lucy and Stephanie once a week. Okay. We'll go through the room. Yes, yes, yes. Is she? Should I just text her a couple days? Yeah, well, so what Matt told me is like if we can meet. 12:20? I'm sorry? 12:20? Yeah, 30 minutes. When did it start? Probably about that. Yes. Okay. I'll put water there. Water. So what Matt told us is like if she would do this good job, just like kind of as long as you ping between each other so that you're both not in one. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Cool. Exactly. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. I've had 2 that seems like 4 a.m. So you need a break. Yeah. Plug it in way down there.
I mean, there's plenty of power in the closet there.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and in that. Oh, nice. Wait, send us to the closet.
I mean, we could. I thought you had a cord maybe. I do have that, but I don't know how much there is one of those. At some point, it gets too much, so.
All
right, fine. Will that work?
Hey, hello.
And if we put it right there, let's see if I have anything else.
And the stationary chairs got open, so. And people are just having to run on
We're
cellular.
probably maxed on what we can pull off out of the circuit.
I don't wanna. Because of all these big lights. Yeah, I don't think it's.
Well, actually, the LEDs are very good. They're mine. Whatever you want.
And I can
day delivery boy. I don't. Literally, I don't know if I'll be here tomorrow or not, so. But that, the 24-hour place is out of the open all the time. You can actually get coffee at somebody else's house. And I think it's 24/7. Yeah. So you can get coffee. And then we just pay for it. There's nobody there. Oh. No, it's actually, I mean, it's not a machine, it's literally like a Starbucks coffee canister thing set out. So there's a sheet that's to do with the supply. There's snacks, chips, bars, stuff like that. And sodas, things like that. So the coffee was, so I guess there's one person doing it, right? And so it's sort of touchless service. Yeah. Okay. Which, and it's open on the holidays, so that's actually